Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast.
Got a special guest today that spent 13 years working in child protective services. We're going to talk about how to protect children and adults from abusive situations, signs, things like that to look for. Let's dig right in. Continuing on this same thread that we've been working to develop awareness to protect children, brought in a friend, Tammy Bartels. For you that are older than, say, 40, you'll remember Bartels and James. No, she's not the heiress to the Bartels and James fortune, but her name just happens to sound like a gross wine cooler that we in the 80s and 90s guzzled out of our parents' garage refrigerators, which if you were not old enough, you shouldn't be doing. Anyway, you spent 13 years, correct?
Yes, I worked.
Working. Go ahead.
In the state of Kansas, foster care is privatized. So I worked 12 years for one of the state contractors, and then the last year for the state itself as a child abuse investigator.
So for the first 12 years, what was that job? What did that look like?
So I did a lot of things there. I started out as a receptionist. I was a receptionist for about 8 months. That is literally the craziest job on the face of the planet. And I worked at a state prison in the mental health department before that. So that says a lot because you just deal with everyone. And then after that, I moved to a support role where I assisted the case managers doing things like transporting children to visits or watching them during meetings or participating in meetings. I've testified at court on cases. After that, I moved into the position as the adoption coordinator. That was the best job in the foster care system, was coordinating and organizing.
Is that sarcasm, or are you being...
No, it really was. It was
Okay.
fantastic because my job was to just kind of coordinate all of the paperwork and make sure everything was in place so we could finalize adoptions.
Okay.
And so I've probably worked on 50 adoptions during my time in that role. It's rewarding to see the kids go to a forever family if they're not able to go home. And then I finished up my term there. I did some administrative assistant stuff. And then my last position was as a resource coordinator. So it was my job to recruit foster parents, train foster parents, get donations. So school supplies for kids. I was in charge of 5 counties and 800 children that I got Christmas presents for just before I left the position. So I did a little bit of everything.
You had to personally get 800 Christmas gifts, or you help facilitate that?
So I've facilitated it. I sent out letters to donors, contacted radio stations to get them to do advertising, saying that we were collecting donations, went to events, set up tables at different community events to recruit people willing to donate. And then when those presents came in, I had to check them against each child's list. And then get them bagged up and redistributed, because some people would give everything on a kid's list and some people would give 3 things, and we wanted it to be as even as possible. So we'd kind of redistribute things. It was really rewarding. Just the whole office would be full of Christmas presents. Coordinated
cool.
with, it was cool. Worked a lot with big companies like Hallmark. Our local Hallmark stores did, or the distribution facilities did big fundraisers with their staff.
So that kind of, just for the audience, listener, viewers, so kind of the thought process why we wanted to have this conversation with Tammy is, if we, through our social media, have shared maybe a story, an image about a child maybe that was caught up in CPS, Child Protective Services, in whatever state, what we've seen is a huge response from viewers that looked at that, and they say things like, oh, the system's effed, or CPS is garbage, or those people are corrupt. What I'm hearing is just from what you just said, there's a bunch of people working in this office that I'm sure are not making $1 million salaries that are spending a bunch of time to get kids Christmas presents. So like, where's the disconnect? Why does so many people think these organizations are messed up? And then, you know, we hear about a bunch of employees working like crazy to get kids toys. Like, where's the miscommunication between public perception and reality?
I think it's kind of like a plane wreck. When there's a plane crash, everyone freaks out and they think, oh my gosh, there's so many plane crashes. Or the Second Amendment stuff, even if there is a horrible active shooter, especially if it's at a school, everyone freaks out and is like, oh my gosh, all gun owners are evil. And or cops with the recent incidences. Oh, a bad thing happens with a cop, all cops are evil. We tend to just group people together, I think, as a society by their job, by their beliefs, whatever. And it's much more nuanced than that. And so there are definitely shit people, if you'll pardon my language, in the foster care system.
You can say whatever you want.
Okay. There's definitely bad people in the foster care system. You know, I've worked with foster parents who are there just to make money, and they pick the most difficult kids and they do the bare minimum to keep them placed there because they collect more money. I've seen social workers who are burnt out and they're just done. I've seen agency leaders who are more interested in the bottom line than, you know, what's best for a child. But boots on the ground, people are honestly doing so much and giving so much of their lives. And it is not a well-paid job, especially when you work in the foster care system at the ground level. I was not getting rich while I worked there.
When you're talking boots on the ground, you're talking about the people that are going and doing house visits, that are driving kids to visitations, that are going to court proceedings, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I know people all the time. My family, for example, there was one year a social worker asked me, hey, this kid's had a really bad time. It's his birthday. We'd really love to get him something for his birthday. And we just didn't have the capacity to do birthdays also. So we didn't have, anything to give. And I was at home talking about that with my then 8-year-old son. And he's like, I know what boys like. Let's go shopping. So we went shopping and we bought birthday presents for this little kid. So we bring our families into it and they get involved. And my daughter has helped run around and collect presents from different agencies to drop off at the store. So it's very much, people get really involved.
Meant you personally were spending your resources to buy this young boy some gifts, which is awesome. But logistically, if you've got thousands of kids, Tammy Bartels or whoever can't, even if it was $5 a kid, you just can't do it. It's just too much. So I guess a couple of questions. I have shared a few stories. One of them, boy AJ, maybe I'll grab his picture off the wall in the other room in a moment. He was beaten to death by his parents a few years ago here in my town and buried in a plastic Tupperware container about a mile away from where I'm sitting in a cornfield. In Illinois, it's DCFS, Department of Child Welfare Services, whatever it is, child welfare. They had visited, they had done investigations. This house was squalor. There's feces, there's garbage piled up, there's rotting food. I mean, this place was bad news, and they left the kid there. And so people hear that. That's the stuff I think that inflames people. And then you hear about other families. I've known people personally. Kid goes to the emergency room falling off his bike, and the police think it's a abuse case. And then next thing you know, this parent is having to be investigated or have some stranger like you come in their home every 30 days and check the welfare of the kid. Like, how does a kid fall off a bike? And I know you can't speak for everybody, but like, how does this happen? A kid falls off a bike and mom and dad, who are pretty good people, end up being treated like they're murderers. And then some people that are literally beating a child every day and they live in a shithole end up not having the kid taken away.
Yeah. I don't know, because I've seen some of that too. A lot of that, the social workers aren't actually who removes the child. They report that to the courts, and the courts make the decision. So a lot of times it depends on the judge, which judge gets assigned to your case. And not to say that all judges are bad, but sometimes they have weird ideas about being able to help a family or save a family, or they want to see more stuff done. And I don't know, because we have a similar case that happened here that was pretty high profile, where a young man was murdered by I believe it was his mother and stepfather, or his father and stepmother, and then fed to the hogs. And they only found out because they found like remains in the hog pen. It was horrible, and everyone's like, how did this happen? How do we not know? This child was known to the system, and those are the ones that get people upset, and we should be upset about those and holding people accountable to that. Those are
That
the
was
exceptions.
Adrian Jones.
Yes. Yeah.
Michael Jones and stepmother Heather. They both got life sentences. I just looked it up just so I knew what you were talking about. Good Lord. Oh my.
Yeah, it was a terrible case. And that's a case where it clearly sounds like DCF screwed that up. And I don't know how or why. One of the things, and not to make excuses, but when I shared in the comment on one of your posts, when I started working in child welfare, there was one case manager, had 5, 7, maybe 10 if they had a large SIB group that they were in charge of. And when I left, that number was well over 25. If a social worker had a support worker, then they may be handling 40 cases. So 2 people handling 40 children, having to do monthly visits, medical, it's not sustainable. And so nobody likes taxes, but taxes pay for that. And when we take money away from the system, that's what you get. You get children getting hurt, unfortunately. And really, money is the biggest problem in the system. We, several decades ago, cut state mental health services and privatized all of that. And we had children that clearly needed long-term mental health treatment in a facility, and they were limited to 30 days. And 30 days doesn't fix some of these children's problems. I shared with you when we were talking the other day, I had one little girl who, she was 8 or 9 and stabbed a male teacher at her special ed school. And she needed to be away. It got to the point where she was just rotating in and out of foster homes, into mental health services, into a foster home, into mental health services. We joke that there was, we took bets on when this child was going to end up in jail for murdering someone, because she was just that messed up by what happened to her.
That's nuts. You talked a minute ago about the judge's role. This comes up a lot, not just in cases pertaining to children, but again, well, this one is a child. I just shared it the other day. A man molests I believe, 13-year-old girl, masturbates in front of her. He was a cab driver. He's transporting her to and from a school. And he got 90 days in jail. So people are mad at the police. They're mad at the state's attorney. They're mad. It's like, well, no, a judge gave him that sentence. And I've talked frequently, not to sideline the point, but I talk frequently about why it's necessary to pay attention to the elections of local judges. Like, who are you? How do you treat these types of things? And I think the members of a community, wherever you're at, what's important to you? Is stopping drug trafficking important? Is traffic tickets important? Whatever it is, go talk to whoever's running for judge and say, how do you feel about people that hurt children? And be specific. Like, how would you treat a case of a parent beating a child in such a manner as some of the things we're talking about? So what does it look like? You go out, you go to XYZ house, the Jones or the Smiths, and you get called there. Like, how does that process work? Somebody has to initiate all of this. What does that process look like to go from child is in need or could be, so you go investigate, all the way to the point that it's handed off to the court system? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So the process, or at least here, I can't speak to the process everywhere, but while I was working in it in Kansas, we would get a report, usually from a school. We used to talk about the fact that during the summer, things would slow down significantly. And it's not like children aren't getting abused over summer break, but teachers are one of the top reporters of abuse. So I think that's really an important thing to think about, is during the summer, who's looking at these children, who's watching them, who's keeping them safe. But we would get a report. There was a separate department that would review these reports and kind of decide if they had merit. There's actually an interesting news story out right now about a county that is using an AI algorithm to determine if a case should be investigated or not. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. It sounds like the algorithm is disproportionately targeting people with disabilities, because they do tend to have higher incidences of having trouble maintaining. They're less likely to be at work or have struggles getting their children places, especially if they have transportation issues. But there's a team that looks at these and says, okay, this one warrants looking at. They also, if they're getting multiple reports on the same child, that bumps up the urgency. And then a worker is assigned, and the worker goes out, attempts to make contact, usually by phone first, if it's a non-emergent incident. If it's an emergency incident, then the police go and they do the removal. So there's two processes for a child to be removed from their parents. The first one usually involves the social worker, and they make recommendations. A court date is set, and we go and do this investigation. We talk to relatives, we talk to the kids if they're old enough to communicate. The really hard ones is when the victims are small children and they can't communicate. But we do those things, and then we head out, put up a court report, send that to the court. The court sets a date. They review all the information. The social worker will testify. The parents are given the opportunity to testify. And then the judge makes the decision whether to continue with the child placed at home with services, without services, or if the child needs to be removed. Now, if it's an emergency situation where a child is clearly in imminent danger, the court can do a removal right away without an investigation, and they basically send the police and a social worker to remove the child from the home.
You said it's not, you only can comment on your time and work in Kansas City, but that sounds pretty like a pretty standardized process. Basically because most of our laws are based on the U.S. Constitution, so there's a chain of care and custody that has to be followed. So not everything is abuse, right? Sometimes it's neglect. It could be somebody might just not have enough money to turn the heat on or to buy food. So it's not always like evil deeds that you're looking into. It could just be poverty, or like you said, somebody with a disability that can't get around as well. As you were talking, I was taking some notes, and I was just kind of thinking, you brought up teachers. So they're mandated reporters probably in most states. Talk about that, like what a mandated reporter is.
So a mandated reporter is educators, so teachers, anyone who works for a school district, anyone who works for the state, in Kansas at least, so like social workers, things like that. People who work in different mental health workers, hospital
Healthcare, yeah.
workers, yeah, they're all
EMTs,
mandated reporters.
firefighters.
Yeah. And so that means that they are legally obligated to report suspected abuse or neglect to the state. And I, several times as a mandated reporter, I've been like at Walmart and I'm like, don't hit your kid, don't hit your kid, or I'm going to have to report it because I was a mandated reporter. But, but yeah, I've been at a place going shopping and glanced in the back of a vehicle, and it's a pickup truck, and this kid's car seat is in the little space between the bucket seats of the pickup truck and the back wall, so that it's facing this way instead of the way it's supposed to be sitting, which does absolutely nothing. And so I had to report that. Got the license plate number, reported it at work. I actually was someplace where they were able to send out someone who knew how to do the car seat installations, and showed them how to properly install that car seat and things like that. But yeah, so mandated reporters are a vital part of the system, and where most of the references come from.
Something I think that, like, I think anybody, this case we were just looking at with Adrian Jones, if you guys Google that, you're going to see horrible pictures of a little boy. There were photos that his parents must have taken, because if somebody else had taken him, the boy would have been immediately removed. His father would secure a plastic cutting board to his chest with like ace bandages, I'm assuming to make him immobile, and would like look like it wrapped his arms up to immobilize him. Pictures, he looked like a boxer, like somebody had beat him up, blood pouring down his face, and the little guy was like looking tough, showing whoever was taking the pictures this stuff. Clearly, if you look at something like that, you're like, that's messed up. This is an emergent problem. We got to get the police here now. But I had somebody, this is what you and I were talking about, message me that they had a young family member come over, and she had belt marks, whip marks, like up and down the back of her legs. A lot of people think that that's just a spanking, or and this pisses a lot of listeners, viewers off. I get like hate messages from people, don't tell me how to reprimand or raise my child, and then people will quote scripture to me. We can talk more about that, but from a legal standpoint, like your job as an investigator that's out looking at this stuff, what is the difference between abuse, physical we're talking about, and reprimanding, child rearing, discipline?
Yeah.
Where's that line drawn?
Yeah. So just like everyone, there are social workers that have different belief systems. They were raised different. Generally speaking, the difference is it's not against, people can whip their children with belts. It's when they start using other things. Paddles are not a problem. But we had one little girl came into care because she had been spanked with a wire coat hanger.
So just to clarify, in your state, somebody hitting their kid with a belt or a wooden paddle, okay, metal coat hanger, bad.
Yep, metal coat hanger, bad. And usually it
Wooden
amounts
paddle,
to the
okay, leather belt, okay, metal coat hanger, bad.
Yeah.
Because of our perception of the object?
I think some of it is that, the perception of the object. Some of it is literally the amount of damage that is done. So if the child gets hit with a belt and the belt breaks the skin, then that moves beyond just, spanking your child. You have now physically abused them.
So a big welt or a bruise, okay. Ruptured blood vessels under the skin, okay. But if the outer layer of skin is broken, now it's bad. Is that what we're saying?
It
I'm just asking.
Yeah, no. And that's where it kind of becomes situational. You know, are there other indicators that there's a problem? Is there, you know, also emotional abuse? Is there, you know, are they getting spanked, but also the electricity's off? And you can't remove children, or you're not supposed to be able to remove children for poverty related issues. Social services is supposed to provide support services to get them back where things like the water is on and the electricity is on. You're not supposed to remove them for poverty things, but that becomes a complicating factor if there are other things. So they're getting spanked, and then also the family's in poverty and the electricity's off. That compounds where you're probably more likely to be able to remove them if it's just spanking or just the electricity off.
So, of course, this is all just Tammy's personal opinion, and there are thousands and thousands of people that do this job. Just like when people like ask a Kappa question, right? Like, what is this? And it's just one man or woman's interpretation of their job. Do you think it's acceptable to hit a kid with a paddle or a belt? Like, I mean, I'm just asking. I'm trying to gather.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Actually, my children didn't even get spanked with hands. I am a big believer of I don't want my children to be, I never wanted my children to be afraid of me. I didn't want their compliance based on fear. And I don't want anyone's compliance based on fear. Obviously, there are people in the real world that you have to use fear to get their compliance, like if they're trying to harm you. But for children, you don't need to gain compliance through fear. Children are generally more interested in your approval and your acceptance. And my children have not grown up to be monsters. My daughter is a high school assistant principal, and my son is 22 and working on the management track at FedEx. So not, you know, worthless monsters because they didn't get spanked.
So why do people so quickly push back? Like, when I guarantee that when this airs, I will get messages saying, one quoting me scripture such as the blueness of the womb cleanses all unrighteousness. That was one I would hear all the time. A fool's back calls for strokes. That was another one, I think Proverbs or something like that. And then, of course, spare the rod, spoil the child, which is talked about constantly. And people, to your point, I will automatically, or usually automatically, the response is, my job isn't to make my kids like me. It's to, like, you know, steer them to the path of righteousness, or my job isn't to be their friend. And I always thought, why wouldn't I want to be my kid's friend? Like, I know I'm not supposed to be like, hey man, you want to go like ride bikes or whatever and blow off school, but like, if somebody has to be the adult. But now we're talking about something different than technically abuse, because usually parents that are talking about this stuff do care about raising good humans. But what do you think? Like, why is so many people, why does and do so many people want to argue the point of using pain as a way to correct behavior? I always tell folks, to the best of my knowledge, I know like 10 people that are dog trainers. None of them hit puppies to raise a dog. When you do that, the dog is ruined.
Yeah. I think some of it is generational. So many times, you know, a lot of us, we grew up getting spanked, and that's just what we know. And then we see that a lot in the foster care system and in everything. People do what they know and what they're exposed to. So before working in foster care, I worked at a state prison in the mental health department. And this prison we were at was where they put all of the sex offenders, because that whole thing about, you know, if you're a sex offender, you're going to be in trouble in prison is true. So they would group them all together. And I was the receptionist at the mental health department, maximum security, and part of my job was to review new inmates' files to see if they needed services. And we had a lot of pedophiles that were placed at our prison, and almost to the person, they themselves had been victim of sexual abuse when they were children. And so that's what they knew. That was normal to them. And I think you and I talked about it a little bit too. It's the same thing with spanking, that it's normal. That's how they were raised. So that's how they're going to raise their children. And we see that when I was working at the foster care agency, I worked with a subset of 4 girls, and all 4 of them aged out of the system. And one of them had a child when she was 18 that then was in the system. And so there were a couple of different incidences where we had the parent when they were a child in foster care, and then their children came into care also. That's probably
just to be generational.
Yeah. And I think
so
it's the same
often
thing
happens with so much stuff, good and bad.
Yep, definitely. So, and it takes someone to break that cycle, and it's hard to break those cycles. We see that with poverty a lot. It's hard to break those cycles of poverty.
It's all about thinking, what we think about. And that's seems so cliche. That's like what you just said is always the oft repeated phrase, got to break the cycle, don't continue the cycle of abuse or of whatever the negative trait is, which is kind of interesting because a lot of folks look at generational wealth or people that families or bloodlines that tend to get good jobs, good educations, and they often think that there's some kind of conspiracy at play, like, oh, all these people are always rich. The rich keep getting richer. Well, they're doing the same thing that you're doing, except they're doing it with good things, or maybe not that money is good per se. But they're using education, and it's just their life is centered around these certain things, and somebody else's life is centered around something else, and you just choose it. It's nuts. So we talked about teachers, and correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of times when I'll have folks ask, like, hey, I've got this situation, I'm leery, especially if I don't know the people, they're reaching out over the internet. I don't want to tell people just call the cops, because I don't know what's going on. It could be some angry boyfriend or something trying to get back at a girl, who knows. So I tell people a lot of times, go talk to the school, call the school, let them know, hey, little Timmy or Sally or whoever it is, this is my relationship or how I know them. I'm concerned for XYZ reason. And at the very least, I would assume the principal, the teacher, the deans, whoever, are going to initiate some type of investigation. That's what I tell a lot of people when it's not an emergent problem, as you talked about, an emergency of something that requires action now. Otherwise, call 911. Some kid's bleeding or in peril. Does that sound like a good course of action?
It is. Any mandated reporter, if you reach out to them, the school is a good thing. But like we talked about earlier, school isn't in session year round. But during the school year, you can reach out to the school and say, hey, this is Susie's aunt, and I have these concerns. Has the school seen anything? And then if nothing else, that gets it on the school's radar to watch for things. You can also, many states, you can report abuse anonymously so that they don't know, so the parents don't know who reported that. I've always been kind of an in-your-face person, and I've reported people with my name, but I want them to know that people are watching out for them, but also I have a different level of comfort with the system than other people do. So you can report to the state anonymously.
Is there any less weight put on an anonymous report? Like I've heard folks say, if it's reported anonymously, it just ends up in like a bin on somebody's desk that they'll look at if they get time.
No, not in my experience. We've gotten some anonymous reports. I think the workers in the system understand that family relationships are complicated, and they'll weigh those equally to things that are reported with a name. just because people are scared and they'd rather people report something anonymously than not report it. It does help to have the reporter's name because then they can follow up with the individual. If it's someone who has a relationship with this child, they're able to go then and interview them as a part of the process. So it's helpful to have the reporter's information. Sometimes it'll move the process along quicker or further, but it doesn't, not having someone's name doesn't negate the information in the report.
I see. Let's talk about signs and symptoms. Like, what is somebody looking for?
There is so many different things. So and it depends on the type of abuse. Physical abuse, that tends to be a little more obvious. Bruises, kids who wear long sleeves when the weather's not appropriate for long sleeves. Not necessarily pants. I wear jeans all the time. I don't care if it's 120 outside. I'm just a jeans person. But if somebody's wearing, if it's summer and the kids got on like a long sleeve shirt with pants, they're trying to cover and hide things. Excessive absences. So if a kid is signed up for dance classes and they miss several in a row, they may be keeping them home to wait for bruises to heal, things like that. Wearing the same clothes over and over again, that isn't necessarily a sign of abuse, but possibly neglect. When my daughter first started teaching, fresh out of college, she was a high school teacher, and she had this girl who was coming in wearing the same clothes all the time, and her hair was looking a little grungy. She's like, "Mom, I don't think they have water on at home." And so she reported that as a mandated reporter, but then we also worked within the school to get the school to allow kids who needed to come in early and use the showers in the locker rooms. And we went to the store and bought all these little things, like little personal deodorants, the travel deodorants and things, and put it in a nondescript backpack. And any kid could come to her classroom, grab the backpack, go to the showers and shower and come back. But, it ended up that family was having some financial difficulty and they didn't remove the children, but they were able to get them help getting the water back on at home. So things like that, children who are not normally reserved, who are all of a sudden reserved or quieter than normal, especially, children now are hyped up. My son had terrible ADHD, really hyped up. If someone like him all of a sudden was coming to school and being super quiet and I hadn't gotten report that they were on medication to help address that, then that would be a sign of concern. Fearful flinching if someone reaches towards them. So it really just, so many different things. The biggest indicator is usually changed behavior without a known cause.
Okay. How does a career of years, how does that affect the person that's out there doing this job?
So it's hard. Reading things like you posted the other day, it's upsetting sometimes, and I feel guilty for leaving the system. I think when you and I were talking, I was like, I just couldn't take any more dead babies. And I have a couple of friends who are law enforcement officers, and it's very much like that. So firefighters, police officers who see those things. It's terrible. The last case I worked before I left working in the system was a woman drove she drove 3 hours and drove her car into the lake, and with her 2 children in the car, and she freaked out and got out of the car, and
so her intention was to kill all 3 of them.
Yes. Yep. And then a rescuer rescued her son, but her daughter did not make it. And just things like that. It can be triggering and upsetting, but you try not to focus on that. I don't watch shows like CSI because things like that are just like, nope, I've seen that on the other side, and I don't want to relive that. I had this one little girl. Her younger sibling had been killed by her stepfather. So it was this girl's stepfather, but the dead child's father. And he had just shaken her and thrown her against the wall. She was just a few months old when that happened. And I was watching this girl, and it was interesting watching the trauma of the family. Like, the family would show up to meetings with buttons on with the picture of the dead baby's face. And I was watching this little girl once during a meeting while the family was all in meetings. And she was playing with a doll like little girls do. And I was like, "Oh, is that your baby?" And she looked at me and goes, "No, my baby's dead." And that was kind of like the beginning of the end for me. I'm like, no, I can't do this much longer. So yeah, it's very much like being on a police department or a firefighter, where you see those horrific things. So you develop kind of a sick sense of humor. And
Like an ER nurse or a
yeah,
fireman.
yep,
Yeah.
same thing.
Would you talk with your coworkers? Would you guys kind of vent or decompress, or was it more like just a sick sense of humor and power on?
Yeah. No, we would. And I've had a lot, and I still have several friends. I've been out of the system for more than 5 years, and I'm still friends with several of the people that I worked with. And you become very close to those people, because you can't talk about cases outside of work, the details of them while they're in process. So the only people you have to talk to are your coworkers. So we all became really close friends, spent time together away from work and things like that. But we do, I forgot where I was going with that. But yeah, so we talked a lot at work. In fact, it got me in trouble at my new job, because I tended to think that, this is what coworkers do. We bitch to each other, but that is not the case outside of those arenas.
What were some good outcomes? Like, what are some stories of some good?
I think there were a lot of good outcomes. It's really easy to focus on the bad cases, but we had a sibling set of three. They were super awesome. I would drive them an hour each way twice a week from their foster home to visit their parents. After several months, they finally just terminated on the parents, and their foster home ended up adopting all three of them. And I remember I had left the system before the adoption was finalized, but that family invited me to come to the court hearing for the adoption, and they were just different children.
What does it
Yeah,
mean when you say they were terminated on? Like the court system said, never, you just don't get to have these kids?
yeah, yeah. So the court finally is, most cases are supposed to be wrapped up within a year, unless the parents are making significant progress towards reintegration. Um, but yeah, it would get to the point where the court would be like, you haven't done enough, you're not invested enough, you're not safe for these children to go home to, so we're going to let them find a forever home, another home.
The foster family that they had been living with as you were transporting them adopted them?
Yes, yeah. And when I would transport them, like, these poor kids, they would be so upset about going to see their parents. They would, one little girl in particular would get a very upset stomach. We'd have to stop halfway there so she could go to the bathroom. She would, she had terrible gas that like stunk everything up. And by the time that, after they terminated on the parents and they didn't have to go to those visits anymore, this child changed. She became, outgoing and happy and fun. Um, we always want to try to get children back home to their parents, but that isn't always possible.
Yeah, some humans shouldn't be around kids.
No, absolutely.
So this family adopted them and they lived happily ever after.
Yeah. And that's not always the case. Sometimes adoptions fail, and I've seen failed adoptions, but oftentimes, especially if it's a younger child that gets adopted, they go on to have a really successful, normal life.
How about some cases where things didn't work out so good?
Yeah, there's some of those too. I worked with a young man. had been adopted. His parents were terminated on. He had been adopted when he was a teen, around 15. And then his adoption failed. So he came back into the system a year after his adoption finalized, because the foster parents just couldn't handle him. And then he ended up, tracking down with the internet his biological mom, and it basically aged out of the system and went home to his biological mom when he turned 18 anyway.
Mm.
So there's a lot of that. Sometimes, and I think we talked about this, sometimes, especially middle school or high school kids, they don't like being in the system and they'll run away. And so there are children that are technically in foster care that the state doesn't know where they are because they've run away. There's orders out that if the child is found, they're immediately returned. And the sad thing about those is some of those children end up being trafficked. I practice that word. They end up being a victim of trafficking because they're out, they're on their own, they don't have any resources, they don't have any money. And so they end up getting preyed upon by these people who will, give them drugs in exchange for sex, or give them food or a place to sleep. It's really, it's the dark and terrible side of the system.
How much of that did you get involved in?
Not a ton. I live in a fairly affluent part of Kansas, near Kansas City. And so I think it's larger cities, more people, there's less places to hide. Oftentimes a child who ran away would get picked up pretty quickly, but we've had children get to other states, and we did have children that had been victims of trafficking, but I wasn't usually involved in those cases. It was a higher level of worker who had specialization in working with that kind of trauma.
As I sit and listen to all this stuff, and like, our goal is to help people be aware so that they can intervene. Our goal is not to help people not beat their kids or molest them. I am assuming that the people listening to these types of programs are not beating and molesting and abusing their children. So it's more to pay attention. Where's the need? What can people, just like average Joes, do, average Janes? I think it's not like you're just walking through Walmart saving, kids from child abuse. That's not really like a rational way of looking at this stuff, but the numbers, the statistics of children that are physically and sexually and emotionally, mentally abused is freaking nuts.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that people can do. In the firearms industry, we talk a lot about situational awareness, but be aware, watch for those things. If you have young people in your life who maybe you're like, oh, cousin Joe there, he's always been kind of sketchy to me. What is it Chuck Haggard said? If that shit don't look right, that shit probably isn't right. So think about that, kind of take that to heart and go after, pay attention to what's going on in your family, in your circle of friends, in your communities. Get involved. Like you said, the judges, that's a huge thing. Being active, even in the people that are running for office, know where they stand on things like that, because oftentimes they're the ones making the rules. They're the ones holding the purse strings for these different state agencies. And then hold the agencies themselves accountable. They're state employees. If you have concerns about a state employee in the system not being responsive, report them up to their supervisor. There's a lot of different things that people can do.
If you could go become the president of all child welfare, child protection agencies and make changes, what stuff would you change based on the totality of your experience working in one for 13 years?
I think agencies need more resources. Like with the mental health services, if a child needs more than 30 days of services, they need more than 30 days of services. We can't just cut that out and say, oh, sorry, our policy is 30 days. There needs to be ways around that. I think we need more workers. Unfortunately, it's like police officers and teachers right now, they've gotten such a bad rap. Nobody wants to do that. You don't want to take that kind of abuse for that kind of money. And so if we could figure out a way to support the system instead of just assuming everyone is a bad apple because there's a few bad apples. And then, I would make it so that people who make false reports can face some sort of criminal charges, because unfortunately there's a lot of clogging up of the system by people who are using it to get revenge on their ex. And I saw that. I had one case in particular where the dad would report the mom, and then the mom would report the dad, and the children were clearly not abused in either situation. They were just using it as a weapon against each other.
So in your state, if somebody did that, that's not a crime?
Mm-mm.
You would have to
No,
prove
it's not.
it. A law enforcement agency would have to go look into it. And
Yeah.
that's
It's
nuts.
yeah. Well, it's similar to women who make false rape allegations. They give
Sure.
all women a bad name. They clog up the system with false information. It's very much the same as that.
Yeah, that's horrible. Not to
Yeah.
mention that you can ruin the lives, reputation of the person that you're filing the information against. That's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it can cost people jobs.
Mm-hmm.
If it shows up that you were involved in the foster care system, there are jobs that you can't get. It negatively impacts your ability to buy a firearm, depending on what your state's laws are as far as abusive relationships and things like that.
What do you say to the concept of none of this stuff is the state's problem? This is a community problem, family problem. It's not the role of government to be this involved in the individual lives of people. What do you say to something like that?
Well, the last time I checked, vigilantism was still not legal, though it would have been really tempting on several of the cases I worked on. So it is the responsibility of the state. And the state is the people. Everyone who works at the state level, everyone in government is a citizen of our country, is a citizen of your communities that you live in. So it's both. It's a community problem and it's a state problem, because the state is an agent of the community. They aren't overlords of the community. They are agents of the community, and they're supposed to be doing our work in protecting these children.
Well said. Well said. I wish that these things didn't happen, right? I'm sure. I mean, that's like I wish puppies didn't die, and I wish that forests didn't have to burn down and all that kind of shit. That's a waste of energy. I wish these things didn't happen, but that's just not the reality of life.
Yeah.
It so weighs on me because it's just so prevalent. Just looking at the picture of that little boy that you brought up that was fed to pigs. The fact that there are human beings that would so torture a 7-year-old, and then his body, his moral remains are so meaningless that they would feed him to hogs to hide it, it's not even fathomable.
And I think that's a problem, because we think everyone's as nice as we are, and they're just not. There are actual monsters out there. Between working at the prison and child welfare, I can't even. I don't. If vampires were real, I wouldn't fear them, because real people are way more scary. Just some of the stuff that we see out there. people don't care. They literally don't care about you. So one of the things I talk about sometimes is I used to be one of those people that believed only police needed guns. And now I'm a firearms instructor, and people are like, how does that happen? And it was from my time working in child welfare, because I saw protective orders, they don't protect you against anything. All they do is they give the prosecution another tool to use after you're dead. And so it very much drove my desire to get into firearms and teaching and helping other women not be victims, because we saw a lot of that too, like legitimate victimization of women and children by evil men. There are definitely evil women too, but and so that's really been a driving factor in everything I do now. And I think that's important too. So we talk about what other people can do, but what can you do yourself if you're in a bad situation? So, if there's a woman watching right now and she's like, oh, he doesn't really mean to do that. He just gets upset sometimes. No, he means to do that. And you need to figure out how to protect yourself and your children.
So that's an interesting discussion point, right? Like, I've known numerous families who had, pardon the language that's coming, useless, trash ass, not men, but they had penises for fathers and husbands. Some of them may even listen to this and they may cringe knowing that I'm talking about them. And yeah, I'm talking about you, you weak ass bitch. And these women chose, well, I didn't want to break my family up. Like, I've heard these ladies say this to me. I didn't want to break my family up. I wanted to keep my family together. Like, you chose like keeping your kid around a monster, your kid or kids. And I know it's not easy, especially if you don't have a lot of resources available. Personally, it's easy for me to say because I'm not a woman, but I could fancy taking my children and like going and building a freaking shelter in the woods before I would stay where somebody was hurting them.
Yeah. Well, and there are resources out there. It's actually much easier for a woman to find shelter with children than it is a man in most communities, because there are special beds and special areas set aside for that. I'm aware in the county I live in of an organization that all they do is they help women get new lives. They'll help them get a place to live. They'll help them get, disposable cell phones. They help them get away. So there are resources out there. The woman just has to take that step and go. But it's hard. Am I overreacting? Am I being emotional? Am I, it's going to be okay. It's just rough right now because we're, struggling financially. It's much easier to make excuses than take action.
Yeah. Yeah. So you started talking to them. You said he's not doing it on purpose. You said he is doing it on purpose. What else would you tell them?
So when we were talking to abused women as a worker, we would, give them resources, show them, give them phone numbers and things like that for other agencies, which was, the services like that are very compartmentalized. So we would refer them to other agencies, but it would still be up to them to follow through. And we've had women lose their children because they wouldn't leave an abusive relationship, and they chose, the man who was beating them over their own children.
Do you have many memories or stories of a good outcome where like this male that was abusing kids, wife, woman, where it like worked out, where they were changed people and like they went on to have a successful life? Was there many of those situations, or is it, as I would assume, the kids aged out of the relationship and went on to their own life? Or got too big where they could fight back? Like what does that look like? Is there a bunch of happily ever after stories like that?
Um, I don't have a bunch of happily ever after stories like that. I do know, like, the mom of the dead baby story, she did eventually get her daughter back. Her boyfriend, baby daddy, ended up going to prison for murdering the other child, and
Do you
this
know
mom
how
was,
long he went?
I don't know. I can't. I believe he's still there, but I don't know. I would have to go back and look at the case. But yeah, so the mom did. She worked really hard. She got her kids back, or she got her daughter back. When I left the system, they were on aftercare services. So after a child is reintegrated into the home, they get a year of aftercare services where a worker still comes and checks up on them each month for a year. And she was doing well when I left. So hopefully that maintained, but it's hard to say.
So what's the flip side? So these stories don't usually convert where abusive male has some Saul on the road to Damascus story and becomes a good man. How do they usually work out?
Usually we end up removing the children and the parents get terminated on, and then, the children either age out of the system or they get adopted.
So to people listening that might be involved in such a thing, like it's either that when the state gets involved or dude just keeps beating you.
Yeah.
Usually, of course, we don't have crystal balls for anybody, but
Well, and I think a lot of times maybe we're not as aware of the successes, because women who do choose to leave don't end up with their children in care because they did the right thing and they were protecting them.
sure, sure. I've known a few that have gotten out of such situations for sure. Cowardly men, cowardly men. It's disgusting. You usually you can pick these guys out of a room too.
Yeah.
They act a certain way. They've got self-esteem and self-worth issues and are prone to outbursts and anger, and oftentimes they're also well-liked dudes,
Mhm.
like in their social circle or community, and they like, yeah, like Jekyll and Hyde kind of people.
Yeah.
Did you ever have situations? So not oftentimes we imagine like some squalor-ridden home with the water off. This probably happened at mansions too.
Yeah, we've had children in care whose parents were doctors. We've had children. We had one particular case where the dad was like an endocrinologist, so like a high level, highly trained doctor. We've had, athletes children come in, educators children come in. We've had, unfortunately, social workers in the system who lost their job because their children came into care. So it's
Mm.
not always, the people living in squalor. There are some of those, but it's not, usually it's just normal middle class people.
Yesterday, I was sent a case by a resident of New Jersey. I don't know what his connection is to this case, but it he felt compelled. He said, like, maybe I would share it. And I did a little research. I don't just share things because people send it to me. Did quite a bit of research. This guy, his name was Troy Leonard. He was a uh, child therapist for kids that we're talking about, kids that are being sent to therapy because they get put in these shitty homes and shitty situations. He ends up molesting like 8 of them. He served 6 years in jail for molesting 8 children, and his job, kind of like a policeman, like their jobs, like when they totally defy like what their whole existence is about, he's there supposing to be like the guy to help these kids who are in trouble, is the one hurting him. He served 6 years in the state of New Jersey. Um, I think on top of the child sex crimes, which I think it was stacks of felonies, he um, was committing insurance fraud and doing a bunch of illegal billing to the state for work that he didn't perform. So he got only 5 years for the sex crimes and then 5 years for the insurance fraud. I guess the reason I bring it up is you go back and you read through it. I'm like, well, how did this happen? He was looking at a possible 110 years in prison. How did they give this guy? How did he serve 6? And because he cooperated with the state was lenient, and their thought was that the sooner we put this to bed, the sooner these kids can go get their lives back. And as I read that, I'm like, man, if you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, you're going to remember this shit forever. And one day I'm going to be an adult and I'm going to like find out that this piece of garbage only went to jail for, I did the math, it was like 7 months per kid or something, 8 months per kid that he abused. You know, not like that's not how the court looked at it, but I'm just thinking like his total time served, how many kids he hurt. And like, this person ruined my whole life or affected it. Hopefully they can rise above that damage. And this guy just had to go sit in a warm bed for 8 months because of what he did to me. And the court, the prosecutors and the judge, they look at it like they're doing these kids a favor. I don't get that.
Yeah, no, there were a lot of times, there were a lot of judgments that I don't understand at all. I've seen people who were, they beat their kids and they don't even get charged with a crime. You're like, how can you not get charged with a crime? And they're just like, well, blah, blah. So I don't know. I don't get it either.
It's become kind of a common theme, especially in like I should say certain communities. I won't even say what community. You see these flippant comments when you see a news release about somebody being a pedophile, like get the wood chipper or castrate them or hang them. I don't know if I disagree. I mean, of course, once given a fair trial, I don't think somebody should just be incarcerated or punished without a fair trial, because as you just said, people get accused all the time for stuff that they possibly didn't do. But it seems like our sentences are so lenient for so much of this shit. I'd like to look up that guy that murdered that baby just to see. It's crazy how many times these people are treated like, I know guys that have gotten busted with a bag of marijuana that have served more time than guys that molested 8 children. How?
You can get more time for beating a puppy than beating a child.
No shit.
Yeah,
You're right.
I don't understand our whole, sentencing guidelines. I feel like we undervalue personal crimes. And then we just keep letting people out. And we see this a lot right now where, people who are murdering people have been in jail and released multiple times. There just has to be a point where you say, no, this person is incorrigible and we can't fix them. And we don't even really try to fix people when we send them to prisons. They're just being held there. There's no mandatory sort of therapy. There's no mandatory services unless they've got a diagnosed mental illness. They're just, like you said, they're just sitting there, sitting on a warm bed, waiting for their time to be up.
Well, according to the New Jersey Department of Corrections, their tagline on all of their documents is New Jersey Department of Corrections, protecting public safety by changing offender behavior.
They must have a completely different program than this prison I worked at.
Well, that could be, but Mr. Troy had 8 counts of sexual assault to victims under 13 years old. 8 freaking counts. 2 counts, victims under 13. 2 counts of sexual assault to victims under 13. Another count of endangering the welfare of a child through sexual acts. And this got 6 years behind bars. I
Yeah.
don't get it.
No.
I don't get it. I think it devalues the victim. It's saying, yeah, you matter, but not that much.
Yeah. So
Not that.
I think we're in a bad place right now as a culture where we're really devaluing sexual exploitation of children. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, not to get too far off topic, that like the whole Epstein Island. How do we not know who was going to this island and abusing children? You know,
We
the
know.
stuff with, right? Well, they know.
I don't know, you don't know,
Yeah.
but somebody does.
Somebody does. The stuff with the big uproar with Balenciaga right around Christmas time, which is already all gone. Yeah, right now the big thing right now that people are starting to get upset about is this trend on TikTok where men are commenting on young girls' posts. Oh, I bet that's bubblegum pink, which is a reference to the color of their vaginas.
What the
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't pay attention to all that stuff. There are, just to clarify, a girl posts some pictures or something on TikTok, and then a man, the comment is just, I bet that's bubblegum pink. It's just like a flippant random comment, but the comment is, he's like saying you have a young pink vagina.
Yep.
What?
And you know, it's, people are like, oh, it's just a saying, it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal, and we need to make that kind of stuff a big deal. I think.
Where is this being talked about? I haven't heard anything about this.
So I saw it first on, I actually saw a news article about it in relation to TikTok, and then I started doing some digging into it. You know, there's some posts on Instagram that reference bubblegum pink. It's mostly right now, it's a TikTok thing, but if you go to Urban Dictionary, there's a definition of the term bubblegum pink in there, and that's what it's referring to. But I think a lot of it, we're so flippant about child sexual abuse. They make jokes about it. Anime is a thing where you can go watch porn of, cartoons that look like little kids. And as long as we let that happen as a society, it's just going to, bleed over into the abuse of real children.
Damn, I just opened an article up about this. This is horrible.
Yeah. Or they'll say something like, oh, I bet that's grippy. Flippant.
What? Well, wait a minute. Do you know that it's adults and not that it's okay? Social media has created this space. I don't like when people say things like, oh, it's just the internet, or don't get mad, it's just social media. No, it's people using this these pipes, these wires to communicate. But you can say things now that, and I'm not even talking about like somebody will punch you. I can say something that 1 million people or 5 people can read, and nobody knows who I am. I don't have to be concerned about losing my job. Excuse me. Or thank you. Or my sorry, excuse me. Or family seeing it, or whatever. You can just say whatever the frick you want. But that's like what lies in the hearts of men. I don't mean just man with the penis, but mankind. Like, this is the stuff that you want to whisper on the internet to kids. So what is the consensus publicly?
So all the stuff I've seen is outrage, of course. Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. What's going on? That's disgusting. But the internet is so big, and I think the algorithms show you, they're like, oh, this person is disgusted by this, and so we're going to show them things that agree with the disgust. But there could be millions of people out there that are like, oh, it's no big deal, or oh, it's nothing, or you're overreacting, it's just a funny saying. Or
here's a story. A girl named Taylor Lynn wrote, this isn't just about teenage girls. A man commented bubblegum pink on a video of my niece. She was 8 months old.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. Well, and that, 20 social workers at a county, at the county level, you can't combat that. There are so many places where it's easy for people, abusing children isn't just now, spanking them with a belt too hard, or even sexually abusing them in person. There's all these different ways to get to children, and I think as parents oftentimes we fail, because we don't, there's so many pages. Oh, my daughter has this Instagram, and look at her in these cute clothes, and they dress them up like, little adults, and then men out there are, feeding off of that. And
There's definitely, people use the pendulum all the time to talk about societal changes. I don't know if I like the pendulum, because I don't think we're always swinging. I see it more like an arc, like of a, it's a trajectory that we move through, but we get so wild. Like the freaking Greeks lived pretty wild. They did some crazy stuff. There's societies all over the planet, and I'm not a historian or a sociologist, but there's people all throughout time that like have gotten pretty wild. And then you get to like the Puritans, who the Quakers, who shunned all of that. I grew up, one of my dear friends growing up, his parents, they're both gone now, they were lovely people. They grew up in a church where the girls never allowed to wear makeup. They wore skirts that basically went all the way down to the tops of their shoes. No rock music, no dancing, no movies, no TV, no sweets, no caffeine. Like, I mean, it was like anything. And then you have other people, like you're saying, that are dressing their daughters like hoes and putting them on the internet, and that's okay.
yeah. Well, and so much of, our society, it's messed up. So if you're, a young woman, or even an older woman, and maybe your life isn't glamorous and it's boring, or you're dissatisfied, or you're not happy where you've been, and then you're following people like the Kardashians, and then you see Kim Kardashian literally dressing her child up in gimp gear, you're like, oh, so that's okay because
What's
Kim's doing
gimp
it.
gear?
So like with the leather, all leather, and the
Oh
leather mask.
shit.
Yeah, there's a picture out
Like, you
there.
mean
Like,
like you're talking like sadomasochistic bullshit?
yeah, like there's a
Really?
picture on the internet of Kim Kardashian's, one of her children, with like the zip up leather mask on, and then Kim herself dressing like that. And people are idolizing these folks.
Yeah, we're definitely sexualizing young people. I don't remember, other than like a guy having a stack of pornos in his basement or his garage, like as a kid, you didn't hear about these things, you didn't talk about these things, you didn't um definitely didn't turn the TV on and see things. As I was just reading that article, there was a jewelry store ad that was in the article that had pictures of a bunch of um alternative couples. Like, it's just so prevalent. I'm not weighing or laying any judgment on same-sex couples, but just our norms. Somebody shared something with me yesterday. The On YouTube, an adult created like a kids account where you have to, like, be 8 to 12 years old or whatever, and it immediately auto-populated with all of this very bizarre sexual shit, transvestite kind of stuff, and just like um weird sexual shit. And it's like, wait, this is like, when we upload this video, we will put that it is not for children, and that changes how the video gets monetized and all that crap. But like, I don't think we're talking about anything per se that a child should never hear, but it's not children or child appropriate topics. But YouTube is showing these kids, like the guy took a screenshot of like the first 10 videos that YouTube was telling the kid to watch. And it was all sexual content with like gay pride stuff and just very bizarre. Like, this is not colors or how to frickin', do geography or, something about an animal or whatever you would think would be age appropriate stuff. Very bizarre.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing. We're things that we would have investigated and removed children for just 5-10 years ago are now being made more mainstream. Like 100%, if you took a child to a drag show, and I'm not talking about drag shows, I've been to some, I think they're kind of fun, but I would not take my young child to that because they are very sexual in nature. And we would have 10 years ago absolutely investigated someone who took their child to a drag show, but now it's normal and it's okay. And if you say it's not okay, you're going to get lambasted and beat up socially for that because you're not being tolerant.
Why is it not okay though? Why is it not okay
to think that you shouldn't take children to
why is it not okay? Like, why can't just take kids to drag shows? Why is it not okay?
Well, the drag shows I've been to have been really sexual in nature with
what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? That's part of the human experience.
Right.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
I think that children are not mature. There's a reason, and lots of people say this, but there's a reason we don't let kids get tattoos. There's a reason we don't let kids vote. There's a reason we don't let kids drive. There's a reason why the gun grabbers want to say that you have to be 21 or older to buy a gun because your brain is not mentally formed enough to make those decisions. But we're exposing children who aren't supposedly mature enough to make decisions about putting ink on their body, which can be removed, but we're letting them we're exposing them to early sexualization. And I've seen, working in child welfare, we had some young children who came into care because they were exposed to inappropriate levels of sexualization, and it messes them up. We had a young girl who was in care who her mother and stepfather would have her watch them have sex, and she as a teenager became very promiscuous. People are weird, but so she became very promiscuous as a teen, and she was having a lot of dangerous sex, putting herself in bad situations. It damaged her being exposed to that so early.
Golly, that's disgusting.
Yeah. We had another young lady who her mother bought her a sex toy, probably thinking that she was helping this child.
How old was the kid?
She was like 13. But she ended up using the sex toy on a younger sibling, and at 13 became a registered sex offender because her mom thought she was helping her out by giving her a dildo when she was not old enough to have one.
Dildos, so I think we do sins.
Yeah, we do a lot to children thinking that we're helping them by exposing them to the real world, and we're really just damaging them.
Not everybody should have kids.
Yeah. And I'm not a social worker, but these are the things I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Parting words, Tammy. How can we make the world a better place, especially protect kids in the process?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just pay attention and be involved. If there is a young person in your life, be involved in their life. It's really easy to get busy, even as a parent. If you want these kids to be successful, be involved with them. Let them be comfortable with you. Build a good rapport so that if they are being abused, they will come to you and they'll tell you. And if they come to you and they tell you, believe them and till it is proven one way or the other. Always just side with the child and believe them. And there are children who make false reports, but very rarely. I was watching a one of these that you did with the doctor a while back about child sexual abuse. And yeah, what he said, believe them, because there are false reports, but there are way more true reports. And I'd rather believe a child and be wrong and hurt an adult's feelings than not believe a child and be wrong and have the child be hurt. So be involved in children's life, pay attention. If you see something, report it.
I dig that. I appreciate you spending the time to talk to us. You guys that watched, not awesome topics, right? You know, we're not talking about like how to crush everything and beat ass and rule the world and make $1 million and all that stuff. We're talking about how to possibly intervene in the life of a person that can't do it for themselves because, as Tammy just said, their brain's not developed enough, or physically they can't defend or protect or remove themselves from a situation. I think it says a lot about a people, a society, a race on how they take care of kids. I'm definitely not the only person to say that, but how we take care of the least of us says a lot about who we are. And we get so busy chasing all the frickin' glittery things in life that there's little 7-year-old boys getting beat and fed to pigs under our nose or at the house next door. And I'm not foolish. I don't think we can save every child, but what if you affect 1 or 2 in your community? And there's a lot of communities. I think that's kind of the point here. So thank you, Tammy, for sharing some of your life experiences and visiting. You guys that watched, if you don't know what to do, send us a message. I don't have all the answers, but I know people like Tammy, maybe she'll talk to you. I know a lot of people that do, and we're happy to try to help. Training@CarryTrainer.com is actually the email that you could use. You could also shoot us a phone number. The number's on the website at CarryTrainer.com. This is Mickey, Drew behind the editing desk. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Look out for kids.
Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com. Hey man, what are you doing in the podcast room, Steve?
I'm writing a national anthem. It's going to be at folk festivals for Gunfighter Gun Oil.
Oh.
Let me tell you about Gunfighter Gun Oil. Made in the USA. Gunfighter Gun Oil, 100% synthetic. It's gonna last you, baby. Yeah. Gunfighter Gun Oil is the best I've ever seen. It's gonna make you get everything that you've ever seen. Oh, baby, I love me some Gunfighter Gun Oil. Yeah. Oh, Gunfighter Gun Oil. Gunfighter.
Gonna get my lighter out. I don't have it.
It wasn't even Bob Dylan. It was like a love story.